So thank you to everyone who's joined us in the last few minutes. We're going to take a couple more minutes just to make sure everyone who is joining us today gets in through the lobby. And just a heads up, this training is being recorded. So if you don't want to be on camera, make sure your cameras are turned off. So I put a note in the chat for anyone who possibly oversees Nick Lockhart. I am clicking admit for him. He's been waiting in the lobby, and for some reason, that connection is failing. So if he's there in the space, maybe he can look on with someone else. Otherwise, he can access the recording later. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a reminder that this is being recorded, so anyone who is not able to attend today will be able to view it at a later time. I think we're all pretty familiar with the online format at this point, having to deal with a lot of it through COVID. But just a reminder to please keep your mics muted. I do have the chat bar on the side of my slides here, so I can see that as we go. So any questions that might come up, please feel free to throw them in the chat and I will address those. Also, please let me know via the chat, or you can unmute yourselves and just interrupt me if my connection starts to go in and out, because I know sometimes it'll stall or the connection will be poor and I'll lose some people. And I, of course, don't hear that on my end. So if you guys could just let me know if there's any tech issues, that would be appreciated. I'm sure some of you, like me, were up pretty late watching the results come in, so I have my iced coffee. I hope you guys are good to go as well, and thank you for being here so early this morning. So my name is Liz, and I'm here with the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, and our acronym is CARD. CARD is a state-funded resource through the Department of Education. We are grant-funded, which means we are able to provide all of our services at no cost. And we're able to do a variety of different things with the goal of optimizing the potential of people with autism. And a lot of our services are consultative, meaning we can go into the home setting or into a school and work with parents and teachers about individuals they might have in their classrooms, or their own children who are on the spectrum, if they're having behavior issues, if there are academic concerns, if they're having trouble with some of those life skills and self-care tasks. We offer a lot of suggestions, behavior strategies, and we kind of coach and counsel in those settings. We're doing that all virtually right now. Unfortunately, USF has not authorized us yet to be back out in the community, but we are still able to make an impact through Zoom and through email and phone calls. So we're still trying to be there for our families and for our educators. We also provide trainings through CARD, so that can be anything from simple basics of autism overviews to more in-depth on certain topics like social skills, behavior management, homework and academics, all that kind of stuff. We also work with adults, so we might do things, trainings related to independent living or employment. And then finally at CARD, we provide resource and referral information. So we don't have any direct therapies out of CARD, things like speech or occupational therapy, although we know a lot of our individuals can benefit from those services. So we have created relationships with those providers in the community. So even though we don't have those services, we don't provide them directly, we can give out resources and referrals for our families who are seeking those services based on, where they live, insurance they have, and all that kind of stuff. So it's just, it helps people navigate if they're new to Florida from, if they've lived elsewhere and they just moved here, or if they maybe just recently got a diagnosis and they don't really know where to start. It kind of helps, as opposed to doing a Google search. If they call CARD, we can get them connected with reputable services and things that they might need. So kind of a one-stop shop in that sense. So the training that you're going through today is part of our Autism Friendly project, and Autism Friendly has been at CARD for several years now, and we've worked with the Aquarium. We're grateful to have a partnership with the Aquarium for several years, and basically it is our community outreach for local businesses. And of course, we want to be developing skills and encouraging skills in our individuals with autism, but the onus can't be just on them. So we wanted to, create this opportunity for businesses to learn more about autism so that they can be more welcoming, more inclusive. As we're going to learn about today, there are characteristics of autism that make it difficult for a person with autism to navigate being out in public. Maybe they have some challenging behaviors, maybe they have anxiety. So giving you some tools and strategies for your role at the Aquarium so that if you're encountering a person with autism, you can help them feel like they belong there, that you're happy to have them in your space, and that you truly serve people of all abilities. Thank you, Melissa. So our objectives today, we're going to talk a little bit about the Autism Friendly Protocol. We're going to give just a brief overview of autism for maybe those of you who are not familiar with the diagnosis. And then we're going to offer some strategies for that welcoming and inclusion piece, and with particular attention being paid to things that might be different now or have changed since COVID. So these are kind of the steps of Autism Friendly. Obviously, the staff training is what you guys are going through right now. We try to come out to the Aquarium at least once a year to do refreshers for those of you who have seen me before, and also catch up new staff. There are certain, positions at Aquarium where there might be a little bit higher amounts of turnover, but we want to make sure that everyone who is on the floor especially is familiar with the Autism Friendly offerings. So we make sure to come out pretty regularly, and Tristan is great about coordinating that for us. We help with creating visual supports, technical assistance. We usually try to be a presence on the days of discovery, which are the mornings where you open early for the sensory differences in the special needs population. One of those is occurring next Wednesday on the 11th. So I think that's why Tristan wanted to have these trainings to prepare for the fact that there's probably going to be quite a few people with autism in that audience. Unfortunately, like I said, USF has not authorized us to be back out in the community yet, so we will not have a table at the upcoming days of discovery. They're not going to be staffed tables, I should say, but we will have materials available, our brochures and things like that. So I'm going to drop those off for Tristan next week, and please feel free to distribute those to families so that they have access to us and can give us a call if needed. By the way, I should have mentioned previously that CARD, my office is out of USF, so we serve Hillsborough and a catchment area of 14 other counties, but there are 7 CARD sites throughout the state of Florida. So there's one at USF, there's one at FSU, there's one at UM down in Miami. They're all 7 CARD sites are affiliated with the university system, and they're all strategically placed so that every county in Florida has access to CARD. So even if I say that because I know that the Aquarium is a traction not just in Tampa, but people from all over come and visit. So if they are Florida residents, they would still have access to card. It just may or may not be the USF site. We provide all of our businesses with what we call a distract pack, which is a sensory kit. We encourage employment opportunities, and I'm going to go into more detail on all of this as we go through the slideshow. But mainly, I want to emphasize that this is an ongoing relationship. So I know some of you have seen me several times now. My name is Liz. I'm at the aquarium several times a year, and I want you to feel free to contact me at any point for autism-related consultations. If you want to troubleshoot an issue that you maybe had, or if you want to prepare in advance. Let's say you know that there's a field trip coming of kids with special needs, and you want maybe just some tips on how that might go and what to do in preparation. I'm happy to be available to you for those things. So like I said, we're just going to start with a brief overview of autism, and I'm guessing, some of you might be on the spectrum yourselves. Some of you might have close family members with autism, so you're very, very familiar, and then others of you might not know much about it at all. So we're just going to kind of do a comprehensive overview and keep it as simple as possible while giving you what you need to know. But if there's anything I miss, anything, maybe a misconception that you have about autism, something that you want me to clarify or add to what we're going to review here, please feel free to throw that in the chat because I think it would benefit everyone. So we know autism is a complex brain disorder. The origin of autism is neurological. It's brain-based. And in a person who's affected by autism, the left and right hemispheres are not connecting and communicating in what we call a neurotypical manner. And that sometimes affects their cognition, their gross and fine motor movement, their processing of sensory input, and their language development. The current statistic that we're working with from the CDC right now is 1 in 59 children are being diagnosed. And that's a pretty powerful number that goes up almost every year that we have data for it. So when I first entered the field about 10 years ago, for example, the statistic was 1 in 150, and now it's 1 in 59. And it's actually 5 times more prevalent in boys than it is in girls. So overall, for all children, it's 1 in 59, but for boys, it's actually 1 in 38. It is the fastest growing developmental disability in the United States. And I get a lot of questions about why that is. There's several reasons that contribute to that number going up. So one is that we have a really big emphasis right now on early intervention. So there's a lot more awareness in the medical community and among pediatricians about early warning signs of autism, not meeting developmental milestones, those initial red flags. So we're able to identify it a lot earlier now than we were before. We have refined our assessment tools. So the evaluations that are used to diagnose autism, those have gotten more specific and just better equipped to catch certain characteristics. And then finally, whatever it is that is causing autism might just be more prevalent as far as our exposure. So that kind of leads into my next bullet point, which is that we don't know what causes autism yet. And this is a controversial topic in the field because over the years, there have been a lot of things that have been linked with autism or thought to contribute to causing it, and things like vaccines, for example. But we just don't know. And there's been no scientific link proving that vaccines cause autism. We certainly want to respect people's rights to their own opinions and beliefs. But from CARD's perspective, we just always encourage our constituents to make sure that they're following the science. And what we have been able to establish so far is that it's a combination of genetics and environmental components. But it's just the interplay is so complex that we really haven't been able to isolate anything specific. So I just would caution you, if you're hearing about, research and breakthroughs in autism, to be informed consumers. We also stay away from the word cure for autism at CARD because to us that implies that autism is a disease, and it's not. It's actually a lifelong developmental disability. So what that means is that the onset of autism happens very early in life. possibly when the child is still in utero. And a person who is diagnosed as having autism will always have autism. It'll never be quote unquote cured or go away. There are no outward physical symptoms of autism, and this is important for our businesses especially because you are required to follow the guidelines of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you are required to make your space accessible for someone who maybe is a wheelchair user or has a service animal. And with those examples, right away, you have some physical clues. In addition to making your space accommodating for them, you have some physical cues for your interaction that this person might need some extra accommodations, some extra support, some extra patience from you. Whereas we don't often think about sensory differences or autism or developmental disabilities when we're designing space. And outwardly, at least as far as physical characteristics, there is going to be no indication that a person has autism. On the outside, they might present as neurotypical, and that can lead to a lot of problems when we have these, these unconscious bias expectations of behavior. So that if a child who presents as neurotypical is having, an unexplainable meltdown, we might be quick to judge that. Maybe we stare or say things along the line of, that kid is a brat, that child is ineffective, parent is maybe being ineffective. These are the snap judgments that we're making without having that extra layer of, understanding that there might be something going on there that we can't see. So that's why these autism awareness efforts are important to us. And finally, there are 3 diagnostic levels of ability ranging from mild to severe. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with the term Asperger's syndrome. We still use that colloquially in the field, but technically it's no longer, it used to be separate, and now it's kind of been embraced into the autism spectrum disorder umbrella. And this scale of severity is basically just a way to further delineate how much the person's autism is affecting their day-to-day functioning. So a person who's considered level 1, they are the most mildly impaired. Sometimes you'll hear this called high functioning. These are formerly what we would have considered Asperger's individuals, people who are usually very highly intelligent, testing at or above grade level for their age. They, they might be a little unique or unusual in their interaction style, but for the most part, they are able to participate in general education and live independently as adults. And then as we move down the scale, level 2 individuals are a little bit more moderately impaired. These are individuals who could possibly spend half their day in ESE, specialized education programs, and half their day in gen ed, and maybe they're getting, more of those supplemental services like speech or occupational therapy. And then level 3 individuals are the most severely impacted. These are sometimes called low functioning individuals. I personally don't care for that language, but you might hear it out there. These are individuals who possibly would have a co-occurring intellectual disability, meaning an IQ below 70. So a misconception about autism is that everyone on the spectrum has co-occurring intellectual disability, and that's not the case. Like I said, a lot of them are very, very bright, very highly intelligent. But a level 3 person might have that. It was formerly called mental retardation. We call it ID now, intellectual disability. But these are individuals who will present, pretty severely impaired. They might have a lot of challenging behaviors in special ed, self-contained classrooms, and need 24/7 caregiver support, possibly even into adulthood. So as you can see, the wide range of how autism manifests and how much it impacts a person, it's very, very broad. So the Government Accountability Office puts out this graphic that I like to use, and they break down the core characteristics of autism into these 5 pretty much like color-coded categories. So we'll just start with the yellow piece and work our way around counterclockwise. So the yellow represents social differences, and as you can see there, it encompasses difficulties discussing emotion. So sometimes our individuals with autism have a hard time recognizing not only their own emotions and their emotional range when they're getting agitated, how to cope with that, but they also have a hard time recognizing emotion in others. So responding to facial expressions and body language and things like that. And that can lead to difficulty with conversation, with making friends, with sharing interests with others. Sometimes there's not that back and forth reciprocity. And, you know, our individuals who crave social interaction, a lot of times because they're not great at it, at least not naturally, they have to, you know, do a lot more practice. If they find that over and over they're failing to connect with others, if they're failing to have meaningful conversations, if they're getting bullied, if they're being made fun of, then that can lead to a total disinterest in other people. So almost a preference to be on their own, because maybe in the past they've tried to make friends and it has been unsuccessful, and that can be really dejecting and embarrassing. So they might isolate. And then moving down, like I said, working our way around, we're going to move on to the red piece, which is the communication differences. And this can be someone who is completely nonverbal. There are people on the spectrum who do not speak at all. They might use American Sign Language or an app on their tablet or something to communicate for them, like a type-to-speech app of some sort, because they have apraxia or some sort of you know, co-occurring issue where they're just not speaking. Sometimes we see speech, but in a very limited capacity. So maybe only a word repertoire of 10 words. So they're only speaking in one word at a time as opposed to full sentences. They might have the ability to speak, but not use it in a functional way. So a person who has echolalia, where they're just parroting whatever the other person says. So if I were to say someone who is echolalic, how's your day going? Instead of answering me, they would just say, how's your day going back? That would be their response. So they're parroting what I'm saying. They have the physical ability to talk, but it's not functional. It's not moving our conversation forward. So we see that sometimes, echolalia. We also see the highest functioning individuals in this domain will have very broad vocabularies and be very eloquent speakers, but there's still something a little bit unusual about perhaps their cadence. Maybe they have an unusual rhythm. They might be very flat affect. They might be kind of monotone. So it's definitely just a little bit more stilted than it is when you're communicating with someone who is neurotypical. The purple piece represents routine and repetition. So we know that a lot of individuals with autism crave consistency, crave schedules, crave routine. They like predictability, and they don't do well with change. So this domain has been really severely disrupted for a lot of our individuals because of COVID. You know, our routines are all off. Some of our kids are still doing virtual school, so they're not going into, you know, their classrooms and interfacing with their teachers. You know, some of their favorite businesses might still be closed. They have to wear masks when they're out in public. All of these changes this year that have been difficult for those of us who identify as neurotypical. Think about how difficult it's been for us, and then amplify that for someone who not only craves routine and structure, and it's been such a wild year where things change from day to day, but also, you know, depending on their level of understanding of what's going on, you might not even be able to explain to them or have them, you know, internalize why we're doing all of this. So, you know, card services, the past 6 months, a lot of our families have been reaching out for help when it comes to things like this. So we'll talk about some of the ways that you can address that as far as preparing your families to visit the aquarium. I will say that one thing that benefits us now is that we've been doing it for quite a while. So hopefully for the most part, our families are adjusted, although I'm sure for some it's still pretty challenging. The blue piece is the sensory sensitivities. I'm just going to briefly touch on that right now because we have a couple slides on that in a few. But just know that because of the neurological origin of autism in the brain, the way that they process sensory input is a little bit more intense. So they tend to hear and feel and see things at a higher intensity than you and I do, and it can cause distress or sensory overload a little bit more easily. And then finally, the green chunk represents the intense focus and interest area. So there is a subset of people with autism who have what we call a special interest. And special interest can be really awesome. There's some that we see commonly in the field, things that we kind of see over and over, and an attraction to technology, to appliances. I have had a lot of kids on my caseloads over the years who like to take things apart and put them back together, like radios or vacuum cleaners, things like that. They also tend to be really drawn to transportation things like trains. So the special interest area, it gets them learning. It can help them engage if they, it can help them bond with someone. If I'm working with a child whose special interest is trains, I'm going to ask them questions about it, and that can help with our relationship because I've been showing an interest in what they're interested in, and that is going to make my client trust me a little bit more. And it can also be a great avenue for careers. If we have a kiddo who loves taking things apart and putting things back together, maybe we're looking at a position as a mechanic for him or her. The problem with special interest area, though, or where it can be a little bit of a setback, is when left to their own time and choices, they only want to do their special interest. So if my kid with the vacuums only wants to take apart and put back together his vacuum all day, every day, that is going to lead to the ignoring and learning about other tasks or new skills. Because if I'm only doing my vacuum, of course, I'm not absorbing and engaging in anything else. So then what the Government Accountability Office does is they take that graphic and they come up with these 3 autism prototypes. So all 3 of these individuals, these hypothetical individuals, A, B, and C, they all have autism. But as you can see, the type and severity of the characteristics varies from person to person. And this is where we get into the nuances of autism. And the same as with the neurotypical population, everyone on the autism spectrum is different. So, I'm making all these generalizations and these broad, painting with a broad brush, but I try to say some people with autism do this and some people with autism like that, because everyone is so unique. So as we can see here, person A, what we're going to notice most about their autism or their dominant autistic trait is going to be their special interest area. And that's represented by their green chunk being so large. So maybe that's the first thing about that person's autism that is recognized. Whereas person B doesn't seem to have a special interest area at all. There is no green representation, but they might be a little bit more limited in their sensory processing and their communication, because that's what's represented here with those pieces. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. Bear with me. Okay. So because of all the movement this summer with Black Lives Matter, we definitely want to make sure that we're paying attention to any racial differences or disparities, and closing those gaps where they exist. So the first thing I want to mention is that autism happens in all races, all ethnicities, all socioeconomic statuses. We see autism in almost every group. However, there are disparities in diagnosis. And this graphic is a screenshot from the CDC website that kind of goes into more depth about this topic. And basically it's saying that white children tend to be diagnosed more often than Black children and Hispanic children, even though within the Black and Hispanic populations, the prevalence of autism is the same. So what we were working to do is close those gaps so that, again, those early diagnoses are being made across all ethnic groups, to make sure that every child has access to early screening and early intervention services. And we're doing that by addressing barriers to diagnosis in these communities. So that might look like things like access to quality healthcare, or when English is not the primary language spoken at home. So at CARD, we're more practitioners. We're not as much researchers, but as far as our clinical services, we have made efforts to address some of these barriers. And within the past 18 months, we're very proud to say that we've hired 2 Spanish-speaking consultants, and both of whom are really motivated to make sure that we're reaching the Spanish-speaking population in Tampa Bay. And I think that's important everywhere, but especially in Florida, where we have so many Spanish-speaking families. So I briefly just wanted to spend some time talking about the sensory differences for individuals with autism, because I feel like this is something that pops up at the aquarium quite frequently because it is a high sensory experience. So like I was saying earlier, because of the neurological basis of autism, the way they process sensory input is different. And some of our individuals are sensory seeking, meaning they crave a lot of sensory feedback. They're wanting to touch everything, hold their ears up to things that are loud, feel vibrations, feel pressure. So that might be a sensory seeker. And then by the same token, on the other side of that coin, we have our sensory avoidant individuals, people who cover their ears, who are very averse to new sensory experiences. They might have super limited diets because of their sensitivity to textures and tastes, things like that. So they can fall anywhere along that, again, that very broad spectrum as far as the sensory, the things that are sensory that are pleasurable and things that are triggers. And it's important to note that we all have a unique sensory profile. So we all have, smells that we enjoy, or the textures and tastes of different foods. Some of us like sushi, some of us don't. Some of us wear socks every day, some of us don't, and that's all related to our sensory system and the things that we find pleasing and displeasing. But we are, for the most part, able to regulate our sensory systems very well as neurotypical individuals. So for example, one sensory trigger for me is Jell-O. I do not care for the texture of Jell-O, so I don't eat it. And it's easy for me to avoid Jell-O in my day-to-day life. It's not something that I encounter all that often. But for our individuals with autism who are very sensory sensitive, they have a harder time filtering out all these various triggers. And, even if they have the capacity to do so, they might not have the skills to regulate on their own. So that's when we see things. Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm going to skip that slide, but I'll go back to it. So we might see something like stimming, for example. Stimming is the creation of output to block input. So sometimes we'll see our kids flapping their hands or rocking back and forth, or covering their ears. So if the sensory trigger is something auditory, then of course that would be the covering of the ears. So we can make some educated, if we're not identifying what exactly the sensory trigger is in the environment, we can at least make some educated guesses. And of course, if the caregiver's there, they're going to know their child a little bit better and be able to kind of say like, oh, the hand dryer in the public restroom like really bothers him or something like that. So yeah, sometimes we're so good at filtering things out that we're not aware of things that other people might be experiencing at a higher intensity. So that can lead to the stimming behaviors. If possible, you're going to want to provide a quiet space for someone who's maybe experiencing some sensory overload. They might need to just take a break, go regroup, and then come back. And you can also offer some sensory items or activities. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But I did want to revisit this slide, which talks about the sensory experience at the aquarium. So, of course, any place that you have animals, you're going to have some smells, right? So the fish themselves, I know the lemurs have a reputation for being kind of stinky, but even things like the food from the cafe. And then the touching, not only areas where they're allowed to touch, like the stingrays in the no bone zone, but, a sensory seeker might want to put their hands all over the glass or reach in to pet one of the birds or something like that. So, of course, we want to make sure that we're giving them some tactile feedback in a form that might be appropriate. So maybe a squish ball or something so that they're not tempted to touch things that they're not supposed to touch. Not only because that could be dangerous to the habitats, but especially right now with COVID, we don't want people touching more than they need to be touching. Keeping in mind things like going from light to dark in certain areas of the aquarium, special effect features like the fog machine. So for those of you who have not worked a day of discovery yet, some of these features are turned off because day of discovery is set up to be a little bit more sensory friendly. So you might turn some of these features off, turn them down so they're not quite as, like for example, if you have an audio, an area of the aquarium that has like a loudspeaker, maybe turning the volume down on that. Just kind of some of those modifications to the space, or giving parents the option to not participate in that particular feature if it's not something that can be modified. The sounds as well, of course, the water, the birds, the cockroaches. And then as far as COVID, so our individuals, we've been working really hard with some of our families to get their kids to wear their masks. So because of the physical sensation of maybe not feeling like they can breathe very well, it might be kind of itchy, just an aversion to having it on. And I know that even myself personally, I identify as being neurotypical, and it was hard. I'm used to it now, but it was hard to wear my mask at first. So again, we think about these things that we all had to adjust to and get used to, and then how much more challenging that would be for someone who has these sensory aversions. So wearing masks, using the hand sanitizer, keeping their hands down to themselves. These are things that are COVID related that are going to be pretty tricky for our individuals. So for the upcoming days of discovery, I know that you are asking that everyone wear a mask in the aquarium space. Now, for hopefully this is a little reassuring. We work with the Glacier Children's Museum as well, and they have been doing their Sensory Sundays since June. So they've been open for a couple of these events now, and they have not had as many issues as they were anticipating. So hopefully that's a little bit of a relief to hear. Like I said earlier, COVID's been with us for a while now, so I think a lot of our families are aware that there's an expectation that the masks be worn. Now, the thing that's more gray than black and white is whether or not the ADA allows for people with disabilities to not wear their masks. So we know that people who have like asthma or certain breathing medical conditions don't have to wear them. But again, as we talked about earlier, autism is not a medical issue. It's developmental disability. So technically, there is nothing about the autism specifically that would prevent mask wearing except for the sensory aversion. But it's not like they can't breathe with it on. It's the same as for a neurotypical person. So that's where it gets a little trickier, because you might have a parent say, well, they have a disability, they don't have to wear it. And those, we've just been telling our businesses to take it on a case-by-case basis and trust your gut, because of course, some people don't want to wear them for political reasons, and so they might be abusing those loopholes or using the autism as an excuse because they personally don't believe in the mask wearing. So I know it's a difficult position to be in, but again, I would just encourage you to take it on a case-by-case basis. Be sensitive. It's very possible, especially for our youngest guys, that the mask is just not going to happen. So go with your gut, use your best judgment on that, and get a supervisor involved if you need to. Okay, so for our individuals who have a lot of tactile needs or a lot of auditory aversions, basically anything that presents pretty commonly for a person with autism, as far as their sensory triggers, their caregivers are likely going to bring some regulating tools with them from home. So maybe some noise reducing headphones or earplugs, maybe a fidget spinner or a stress ball to keep the hands occupied, maybe a weighted wrap, for our kids who tend to be like jumpers or runners. We might try to introduce a weighted wrap or weighted vest to kind of keep them grounded and slow them down. And it offers that sensation of pressure, which a lot of times can be very pleasing. So they're going to bring probably their sensory regulating items from home. Just know that you might see some of those come in. But you can also offer a distract pack. So this is what CARD builds as a supplement to things that parents bring from home. So, you know, we always have parents who maybe forgot, you know, their headphones, or, you know, maybe they left them in the car, whatever. So, and if their child starts having a sensory issue, they might ask to check out the distract pack. So these are housed at the guest services area. I believe that there is more than one available up there. And it's just got a bunch of sensory regulating items in it. There's a Rubik's Cube, as you can see. There's a coloring book and crayons. And this would be someone who maybe needs a little bit of a sensory regroup or a break. Now, there's nothing in the distract pack that's so fun that they're just going to want to play with the distract pack, right? We don't want it to be, we don't want to have anything in there that is going to keep their attention. It's just for the purpose of regulating the sensory system, so that then they can rejoin their class or rejoin their family and continue on their way through the aquarium. So because you advertise that you're autism friendly, and we advertise that on our end at CARD as well, when people come in and ask about what that means, this is one of the things that you can mention to families, is you have that available for them if they need it. So moving into communication, we kind of wrapped up the sensory piece there. Again, just a reminder, if you guys have questions, to please throw them up in the chat. So when we're talking about communication, we want to recognize that for a lot of our individuals on the spectrum, their receptive skills tend to be really strong. So when they are getting directions from someone, or you know, anytime they are interpreting or listening, if they're the more passive partner, a lot of times they understand what it is that they're being told. It's the expressive piece where there's usually a difference. So the talking, the giving of messages, being the more dominant partner, that's where there's going to be some noticeable deficits. But we want to do what we call in the field, we call least dangerous assumption, or presuming competence. Those are both basically the same thing, to say, give this person the benefit of the doubt. You know, until you know otherwise, just treat them the same that you would anybody else, and you know, kind of presume that they're understanding everything that you're saying. Obviously, they might not make eye contact, they might not respond in a traditional way, but they're going to appreciate the gesture, and that goes a long way for that welcoming piece. You might see some echolalia or some scripting. So if they say, hey, if you say, hey, welcome to the aquarium, they might say, hey, welcome to the aquarium. That can be, it can be a little silly. It's okay to laugh. But, you know, they're going to be excited to be there. And that's when we sometimes, if we see that excitement, even if it's an anxious excitement, sometimes we'll see an uptick in some of these scripting or echolalic behaviors. Just a reminder, I don't think you'll see this all that often, but whenever an individual with autism uses a tech device to speak for them, so if they speak through their phone or through an iPad or something like that, it's called AAC, and that stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. As the person who is the expressive partner, if you are engaged with someone who you suspect might have autism, and you won't always know, just a reminder there as well. You know, sometimes, unless a parent tells you, or a person is old enough to self-disclose, and they say, I have autism, just a heads up, you might not know. So that is another perfect reason to make sure that you're just being respectful and treating them the same that you would anybody else. But if you find that you're talking to someone and you're noticing some of the characteristics I mentioned, or there seems to be maybe a communication barrier where you're not really connecting, you might want to try slowing down. So, you know, make sure that you're emphasizing your key words, speaking clearly, allowing for some extra processing time. You know, sometimes just because of the synapses and the neural pathways being different, it might take them a little bit longer to respond. You can repeat or rephrase your questions, get down on their eye level, try to ask yes/no questions as opposed to open-ended questions. That can help. And then supporting your spoken information with visuals. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. We know that for the most part, our individuals with autism are visual learners. They absorb visual information better than auditory information. And I don't want that to sound intimidating or like you guys have a lot of work to do, because there are already visuals in aquarium space, and there's also, we all use visuals every day. So right now, for instance, I am giving you the auditory input as I'm talking through the slides, but you also see the slides. So the slides are a visual supplement to my training material. And the slides are permanent. Well, this training will be permanent too, because we're recording it, but you can always refer back to the slides, even if you don't watch the actual video, if that makes sense. So auditory information tends to be a lot more fleeting, whereas visuals are more concrete, which is helpful for our folks. So if we look at this brain scan, we can see that there's a neurotypical brain scan on the left, and we see a lot of symmetry there. And then the right, we see temple grandin, and we see some asymmetry and some abnormalities. For those of you who don't know Temple, she is arguably the most famous person on the autism spectrum. She's in her 60s now. She is a professor at Colorado State University. She's brilliant. She's really, really a cool lady. So I recommend, just checking her out if you have some spare time. She does have a TED Talk that's available on YouTube. There's also a video about her life. It stars Claire Danes. She plays Temple, but Temple consulted on the film. So it is very true to her life and her experience. So she's become an autism advocate. She's taught us a lot about how the autistic brain works. And one of her books is called Thinking in Pictures. And basically she just explains that her brain is not wired in language or text, it's wired in pictures. So as much as possible for our individuals, what that means is that we want to enhance any auditory information we're giving with visuals when we can. Another thing I love to just mention about Temple that I think is so fascinating is she grew up at a time where we really didn't know a lot about autism, and there were a lot of people with autism that were institutionalized back then, and her parents were told to institutionalize her. You know, that old like, she'll never walk, she'll never talk, she'll never do anything. They were told that, and they basically refused to institutionalize her, and look at all that she has accomplished. I just think that's amazing, and how tragic and sad it would be if her parents had ended up putting her in a facility. So that just speaks so much, I think, to what our individuals are capable of when they're given the opportunities. Okay, so visuals. They communicate information to an individual who may or may not have language differences. So like I said, we all use visual information. I identify as neurotypical, but if I'm in a building where I'm not familiar with the building and I need to go to the bathroom, I'm going to look for this, right? That is the universal visual symbol for restroom. So we all use visuals, and you already have a lot of visuals in the aquarium space. So we're talking about things like directional signage, brochures and maps, clearly marked exits, restrooms, exhibit specific rules, etc. Now, I also recommend, especially on day of discovery days or days when there might be a group going through a special needs field trip or something like that, to make sure that you have pen and paper handy, because sometimes our individuals, their communication style, they just prefer to write back and forth as opposed to speaking out loud. And I think that's kind of a generational thing too, because a lot of our younger individuals, even, the neurotypical population, they're so used to texting at this point that, think about even those of you on the call who prefer texting to speaking on the phone with someone. So we've just gotten kind of used to that as a society, that makes it less intimidating and less vulnerable. So they might prefer to write back and forth if they have literacy skills. So using that pen and paper for that. You can also use the pen and paper to make a visual on the fly if you need to. And it doesn't need to be pretty. You can just use, stick figures, whatever. You don't need to be an expert drawer. Visuals also enhance learning and encourage skill development. And I am aware that we are at the 9:50 mark, so I'm going to try to speed up through these last few slides. So if you don't already have some worksheets that go along with your habitats, I would maybe encourage people in the education department to develop those, because they can help people, and not just people with autism, but anyone who maybe has something like ADHD, um, you know, someone who tends to wander through the aquarium kind of aimlessly without much focus. Uh, Worksheets can help an individual like that engage, so how many sharks do you see in this habitat, or draw a picture of the flamingo, things that they would have to seek and do an environmental scan, and help. It kind of helps them stay on task in that way. So this one is an example of how many do you see, can you find me, I spy, that kind of stuff. Visuals also help predict transitions and change. So a lot of times with people with autism, because of that consistency, that routine, wanting to know what's next, we'll a lot of times use visual schedules for them. We also try to make time more concrete, because time can be a very abstract concept. And teaching time management and things like that, we would use a visual timer. So this one on the right, I love that because the red runs out as the time runs out. So it's set for 40 minutes, and as it goes back down to 0, the red chunk will get smaller and smaller. So it really helps to make visual this abstract concept of time. And another example of a visual support is the social experience story, which CARD helps to draft and update from time to time for the aquarium. We also have, I saw Richard is on the call with us today. Richard has helped encourage development of social stories for the different dive experiences. And they're basically first-person narratives from start to finish of what a novel experience is going to be like. So it's written in very simple language, first person, so the person with autism can kind of put themselves in that mindset or in that position, and it helps relieve anxiety and understand what's going to happen, what the expectations are, how I'm supposed to behave while I'm here, and make sense of the environment. It uses lots of pictures of what's actually, pictures of the aquarium are included in your social story, so that they know what they're going to see, they know what they're going to do. And the goal of the social story, it is on your website. It's under the accessibility heading in the Plan Your Visit tab. And it's meant to be reviewed with the parents or the caregivers in advance, so that they have familiarity with the aquarium before they even arrive on site. So the PDF is available on the website, but there is also, if a family doesn't know that it's on the website and they arrive, but they're interested, I believe there's a hard copy at guest services as well. And social stories are an evidence-based practice, so they have been proven to be effective for our kids. These are just some other possible considerations. We always make suggestions, and then businesses incorporate them or not based on what's best for them. But we always recommend for our teachers to, if there's a social story for a venue, that teachers read it to their class prior to the field trip. It can be to their entire class. It does not need to be just to autism-specific classes, because there's a lot of kids that can benefit from seeing something like that in advance. Kids with other disabilities, or even kids who just have general anxiety or tend to be perfectionists, like to know ahead of time what's going to be happening. So that can be good. Allowing vouchers for re-entry if a visit needs to end early. So our goal is for our kids with autism to be able to come in to the aquarium anytime, not just on day of discovery morning, anytime, and feel welcome and have success. But some of our kids just aren't there yet. They're not able to do that. They're going to have a meltdown. They're only going to be able to stay for a few minutes. And so for those individuals, we suggest starting with a day of discovery morning, and then maybe, working your way up. So staying for a longer amount of time each time. And day of discovery is great to do that, because there's also a reduced admission fee. If they're not able to stay very long, it's not going to be financially burdensome. But, if they do come on a typical day, it's pretty pricey to get into the aquarium for a family. A family of 4, I think it's close to $100 or something like that. So if they then are only able to stay for 10 minutes because their child with autism is having trouble, then that might not be worth it to them. So just being sensitive to that, having possibly a voucher program for them to maybe come back and try again if things don't go well. Just something to consider. And then, especially for those of you who work at guest services, being prepared to answer questions about your autism-friendly offerings. So you guys have a window decal that advertises your autism-friendly status, and you also have this little placard. It's a 5x7 that sits on a stand. It says, "Ask me about being autism-friendly." So if a parent sees that, they might not even have a child with autism. They're just curious. Being able to say, we have distract packs. We have this day of discovery days a few times a year. We have the social story. What does being autism friendly mean? I'm going to skip back here and just say that for all of our businesses, we ask them to think about what is reasonable for them. And this is a PDF we have available for download on our website. And I'm just going to read a couple sentences there. I know it's kind of hard to see. But autism friendly is not a guarantee of accommodations or modifications beyond what is safe and reasonable as defined by the business. Safety requirements will remain the same for all guests or customers, regardless of ability. So autism friendly is not a legally binding contract. It's not a certification program. And I mention all this to say that, most parents are super grateful for anything that businesses are willing to do and provide to meet the needs of their child. Sometimes, though, we'll see parents who feel like their child doesn't need to follow the rules because of their autism, using the autism kind of as an excuse. So this just provides the language to you to say, no, that's not the case. Being autism friendly does not mean that a child can run in the splash pad area or a child can, jump into a habitat to play with the birds. Obviously, that's not true and that's not safe. So safety, measures, things that are in place for everyone still apply to people with autism. And you just have to do what's reasonable and what's best for you. Okay. And then just super quickly, again, guest services, knowing the best days and times to visit. I understand I was on the website recently and it looks like you guys are still taking reservations because of COVID. So that's awesome because this helps with the sensory aversion of, lots of noise and crowds. And I know there are certain days pre-COVID times when the aquarium would get really, really crowded. So now that we have to social distance, that's already kind of being mitigated for us. But as COVID resolves, and things kind of get back to normal, knowing the best days and times to recommend that a family visits, when it's likely to be less busy or less crowded, where the distract pack is located if they need it, where the social story can be found. And then just a reminder, I know you all know this, but just a reminder that per the ADA, you cannot ask someone about their disability outright. You cannot say, does your child have autism? But if they disclose to you, if they offer to you, if they initiate saying, my child has autism, or again, if someone is old enough to disclose for themselves that they have autism, then you can ask some more detailed questions to help. What concerns do you have? What are your triggers? How can I help you navigate? You're welcome, Richard. Happy Thanksgiving. All right. I know it's 10. I only have 2 more slides. We'll go through those in probably less than a minute, but I also want to respect the fact that some of you probably have to get going for opening. So I won't be offended if you have to hop off. Tristan is going to forward the slides to all of the participants. I will send her a PDF of the slides. This is being recorded, like I said, for any of you supervisors who want your employees who couldn't be here to watch it. And there will be a survey for you guys to fill out for me as well that just helps with our data. So thank you for anyone who has to go. I'm going to wrap up here with the last few slides. So we do have individuals on the spectrum who might have some challenging behaviors. We might see things like aggression, kicking, habitats, property destruction, tantrums, elopement, which is when a kid runs off on their own. So what do we do about that? And I think at any point in time, any child can have a behavior if they're not feeling well, if they're too tired, if they're overwhelmed. Again, we may or may not know that the person has autism. So for the most part, the tips are going to be pretty much the same as what you would do for anyone, I would think. Making sure that you're protecting yourself, the child, and others. Your role might be just to remove the audience. So if there's a meltdown happening in a really busy area, kind of dispersing people, giving the family their space, guiding people into a different direction until, the issue resolves itself so that, the family has some privacy. I would never recommend that you physically intervene. You could accidentally hurt yourself or the child, and it tends to make the behavior worse. So never get physically involved. Follow the parent or caregiver's lead, just a simple gesture of asking what you can do to help. I have so many families, excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat, hold on. Sorry about that. I have so many families who say, when my kid has a behavior in public, we get stares and we get points and jeers, but no one offers to help. And a lot of times there really isn't anything people can do, so maybe that's why there's hesitation. But I do think just asking, if there's anything you can offer, that goes a long way, and it will be appreciated. So escorting them to a quiet zone if you can, if there's somewhere nearby that's out of the way, if the child is able to be moved, offering a distract pack, and then finally just doing your best. Again, I always end my trainings with this point that, I've been in the field for 10 years now, and any situation that I come across with a child with autism, I may or may not know what to do, and it might be trial and error, even though I had the expertise, because I don't know that child. So I don't anticipate that you feel super confident or like an expert, especially in these tense situations where maybe your blood pressure's raised or your heart rate's going. But just know that if you're approaching with sensitivity and with empathy and respect and doing the best you can, that's all we can ask. So again, we really appreciate our work with the Aquarium for having it, and thank you, Tristan, for having me out today, for everyone's patience here with me doing it virtually. Last thing I want to say is for those of you who are supervisors, just keep in mind that children with autism grow up to be adults with autism. And even though a lot of them have great skills and they're very loyal employees, they'll always be on time. They'll always tell you honestly what they're thinking. So taking out the guesswork of some of those office politics, they are really wonderful employees and have a lot to contribute. So if you have internship or volunteer opportunities where you might want to consider hiring an adult on the spectrum, we do have a sister program at CARD called the Learning Academy, and I would be happy to connect you with some of those job coaches to facilitate, possibly getting that all set up. We would appreciate having some of our folks work for you guys. So that is the training link. I'm also going to put it in the chat. And like I said, I believe that Tristan is going to send it out. This just gives me a grade, and it helps, like I said, with our data and our funding. And my direct email, again, my name is Liz. My direct email is that last line there on this slide. So if you have anything specific for me and don't want to take the time of the rest of the participants here, please feel free to email me. So that's all I have. Thank you so much, everybody. Unless there are questions, I'm happy to stick around, so no rush. You're welcome, Morgan. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm not seeing any questions come through, so I'm going to go ahead and hop off. Have a great Wednesday, everyone, and Tristan will follow up about, I'll send you an email with the slides, and I'll follow up with you about coming to stop by next Tuesday. Bye.